When we analyze the art style of the main Final Fantasy character designers, Amano, Nomura, Yoshida, and Takahashi, we can see how each of them shaped the series in their own way, from Amano's ethereal fantasy linework to Nomura's grounded manga-inspired designs, from Yoshida's earthy, painterly aesthetic to Takahashi's museum-grade illustration work. Each of them defined the identity of Final Fantasy and other Square Enix titles through their own artistic vision. I see a lot of artists get trapped into one style. I try to free myself out of it and move into new things. I don't even know what the Amano style is. While style is an evolving metric in itself, when we break down and analyze Yoshitaka Amano's illustrations, it is clear that his art is one of a kind. To identify the elements that define his signature style, we first focus on his character art. While his use of pale skin tones stand out, he often simplifies the face to make it the focal point in his illustrations. And when we zoom in, Amano tends to draw the eyes rather sharp and elongated. Furthermore, he draws the basic fundamentals in a somewhat semi-realistic way, adding dark lower eyelids and irises. Most of the time the eyebrows are subtle, especially compared to the expressive eye contour. Moreover, here and there, Amano adds tear ducts and eyelashes to emphasize them even more. One thing I noticed is that Amano draws the nose with a downwards pointing tip, which is actually the opposite of what many manga and anime styles do. Another element that might be seen as typical Amano is how he draws the mouth. In most of his characters it's rather dark and small. He draws the hair with a lot of detail. To clarify, he doesn't draw it in the typical manga and anime hair chunks, but more like these elongated individual strands. However, he does so in such a balanced way that it sums up the total of its parts, making it flow well, which to me is not distracting and fits into his character design. Nearly all of Amano's characters carry intricate cloth designs, pulling elements from a wide range of cultures and eras. He favors somewhat lavish clothing designs, full of small details and fancy prints, prioritizing the aesthetic appeal over practicality. We can see this in various trinkets and assets, as well as in his weapon designs. Amano doesn't shy away from experimenting with character posture and silhouette, which could be defined as a somewhat floaty or wispy. For sure, it makes the entirety of his art very stylistic. When we look at his body of work as a whole, we can see his love for delicate detail and all kinds of forms, using thin, elongated, wavy strokes to support it. He also tends to draw most lines in a single, confident motion, rather than in short, sketchy marks. When I do an illustration, I make a point of never asking for guidance, nor divulging things like, "See here, look at this, I drew it according to this image." I believe that pictures have their own distinct energy, and if one tries to put it into words, I feel like it detracts from the energy of the picture. So I prefer to stay silent and let that energy build and build until I can release it all at once in an illustration. On the other hand, if I draw something that I don't feel has that energy, I always end up forgetting about it as time goes by. And as the true artist he is, Amano enjoys working with all kinds of traditional media, such as watercolor, acrylic, and ink pens. Moreover, he does not shy from experimenting with things like running ink, carving wood and copper plates. His work is also inspired by ukiyo-e, which are these old monochrome Japanese scroll and wall paintings. Because Amano experiments with so many tools, his application of colors is no different. First off, most of his art pieces are dominated by one color, such as the primary colors red, blue or yellow. This also accounts for secondary colors. However, when he does use multiple colors, he tends to use a lot of the primary colors in one art piece. He does this by breaking them up and dividing them across the character or background. So what about his character designs? Well, he is great at creating these more mature characters. I think his excessive creativity also makes most characters unique, which made him a great choice for a large character cast such as seen in Final Fantasy VI. With that said, Amano does seem to have a preference for blonde-haired characters, resulting in a tendency for his characters to look quite similar. Aside from him being a character artist, he's also a monster designer. And honestly, he really can show the fierceness in these creatures. He has a great sense of mystique and enjoys translating his own unlimited creative vision on paper, he once said. Don't listen to others, listen to yourself, do what you believe in. Leave your own world to experience others. And that brings us to another giant of Final Fantasy character design. Someone who took those ideas in a completely different direction. Tetsuya Nomura. Known for characters like Cloud and Sora, Nomura's work marks a clear stylistic shift in the series. making him the perfect contrast to Amano. In the FF series, Mr. Amano's image illustrations and the pixel characters' designs didn't necessarily match. I was in charge of the pixel graphic parts, so I never considered myself as standing alongside Amano or taking over from him. Tetsuya Nomura has said himself that this approach was more technical, shaped by the realities of game production rather than illustration tradition. And when you break his style down, one detail always stands out. The catchlight in the eyes. No matter how much his style evolved, that placement stays the same. Off to the side of the iris, slightly above center. The eyes themselves rely on soft curves, medium-sized irises, gentle line work, and a clear emphasis on both upper and lower eyelid creases. Additionally, he tends to depict short eyelashes for both genders. Depending on game project, he sporadically adds tear ducts and relatively short eyebrows. For the nose, Nomura typically renders them quite large and straightforward, with soft, curved indents, depending on the characters. When examining the mouth, it becomes evident that Nomura favors emphasizing the lips, especially adding volume for female characters. Nomura tends to draw the chin and cheeks curved and soft, making most of his characters appear quite gentle. And it goes without saying that all these subtle facial features depends on the specific art style direction of the projects he worked on. So to elaborate a bit for the ones who are less familiar with Nomura, in his 30 year of video game art career, he changed from the early 90s anime and manga style as seen in Final Fantasy to a more realistic style entering the millennium. Soon after, he worked on Kingdom Hearts in collaboration with Disney, implanting many of the soft facial features noted earlier. In between the different main series, he of course did side projects and spin-off titles as well. In other words, Nomura had the freedom to experiment and push a huge range of styles from the typical anime and manga to semi-realism and even chibi. When we objectively look at Nomura's overall art style and design choices, we have to address how he draws the hair. While the hair type varies depending on the art style, as a general trend, he tends to craft them with a curved, soft and yet spiky appearance. For the woman, he mainly uses straight hair falling towards the rear. The thing that sets Nomura apart is his skill in creating depth. He effectively arranges the hair chunks, placing them in a stacked, layered manner that enhances the overall visual appeal. This way the hair always looks dynamic and cool. So when we zoom into Tetsuya Nomura's concept art and check out his color style, he experimented with quite a range of palettes, hues and tones. He went for medium color saturation in Final Fantasy VII. For this, he used color pencils to emphasize the form by using soft and hard edges for shadows to create contrast and depth. In case for Kingdom Hearts, he went with many different approaches. Vibrant colors reminiscent of and aligning with Disney's signature style. Soft watercolors that gracefully flow off the paper. Nomura's design choices always start from function. For Cloud, he literally changed the hairstyle. At first I thought it'd be better not to use too many polygons, but with the swept back hairline, he didn't look like a main character, so I changed his hair. For Cloud and Sephiroth as a pair, he framed them like legendary rivals. The image was based on Musashi and Kojiro, and to push the contrast, he kept it simple, blonde and silver. Short and long. However, Nomura is very deliberate on how each character looks compared to another. At first, Sephiroth and Aerith were to be brother and sister, so I gave them similarities in their fringes. That aspect was dropped during the early stages. I believe the original idea for them to be siblings later became that Sephiroth was Aerith's first love. When we check Final Fantasy VIII's Squall and Cypher, I think we all can see the contrast between their arch-rival character designs. When it comes to Tetsuya Nomura's clothing design, he draws heavily from Japanese street fashion and contemporary magazines. It's a direction that splits people. And honestly, I'm somewhere in the middle. The style choices can be hit or miss, depending on the project. But on an illustrative level, he's undeniably strong. His characters project their intent clearly without falling into flat archetypes. They flirt with that line sometimes, sure, but his designs usually hold enough nuance to keep them engaging. Most of the time. Next is the artist who shaped the painted storybook aesthetic many fans associate with Final Fantasy's world building, Akihiko Yoshida. His work defined the look of Ivalice and influenced everything from Vagrant Story to Bravely Default. In order to be different from others, you need to increase the number of artworks and styles that you look at, and try to find something special that no one else has ever found. When we break down and analyze Akihiko Yoshida's art style, we have to address one of Yoshida's main strengths, his ability to seamlessly switch between styles. During an interview, Yoshida said he likes to mix things up, experiment and explore his style with every new IP he's working on. Despite this, companies often hire him for what, in his own words, has become known as the Akihiko style. And one of the biggest takeaways of Yoshida's character art are the eyes. No matter the realism level, they are very recognizable and striking. When we zoom in, characters often appear very gentle. This is because he emphasizes the upper eyelids with a thick curving line. This technique also adds the effect of expressing eyelashes. Another aspect is his tendency to draw the irises rather large, contributing further to the soft appearance of his characters. Moreover, the lower part of the eyelids and tear ducts are seldom present. Thin eyebrow shapes are a pervading preference in his designs overall. When we look at the face, in my eyes, Yoshida tends to soften the cheeks. Fair enough, this does not count for all characters and IPs, but he has his own way of curving them, slightly chubby. As for other features, such as the nose, their presence varies depending on the game art style Yoshida is working on. For instance, in games like Final Fantasy Tactics and Bravely Default, noses may not even be present, whereas in more realistic styles like Final Fantasy 12 and 14, they are. Do note, it also depends on the distance how much detail of the nose he reveals. In case of the mouth, it also depends on the realism level. As far as I can tell, there is no one way that suits all his works. However, this neutral expression is very common in Yoshida's concept art. For some reason, Yoshida seems to have a thing for legs, or at least find them very important. He tends to draw large thighs with strong leg caps. There is way more to this, but in short, Yoshida said while he doesn't understand his own creative flow, "When I get stuck with character design, I start with the buttocks and go from there." In an interview, he mentioned that old painters like Rembrandt, Millet, and of course manga legends like Katsushiro Otomo inspired his style. To simplify, Akihiko Yoshida has three main art styles: chibi, semi-realism, and his very personal stylistic art. Without a doubt, all of them contain his aesthetic. Yoshida's line art employs hatching techniques to not only create volume and shade, but also to add shape and direction. He strategically maintains space between the strokes, a hatching technique evident in his painting works as well. Yoshida's character designs tend to favor grounded silhouettes, subtle personalities, and practical outfits that fit naturally into their worlds. Except for maybe Nier, his work doesn't aim for the bold iconography of Nomura or the ethereal stylization of Amano, but instead focuses on cohesion and believability. The Bravely Default cast and Final Fantasy XII ensemble are strong examples of how he conveys personality through understated design choices. He's especially skilled at costume work, which makes sense given his long history with job-based RPG systems. With all that said, to quote him, "Just because you're a video game designer, that doesn't mean you should only look at video game art. Therefore, I used to look at other artworks and paintings with great attention." Following that mindset, it's easy to see how another artist might explore similar territory in his own way. Kazuya Takahashi. His contributions to Final Fantasy XIV and XVI mix bold brushwork with grounded world building, giving his characters a lived-in, atmospheric weight. When designing a city, it is easier to decide on the shape of the pillars first. When we break down and analyze Takahashi's work, there's something raw and unfiltered about it. His faces aren't idealized, symmetrical mannequins. They're weathered, complex and human. The eyes often carry a heavy stillness, as if they've seen storms. There's a dark poetry in his expressions, sadness in the eyelids, defiance in the jaw, grief in the brows. It's not performative. It feels real. Technically, his style shares DNA with the Final Fantasy XIV illustration style pioneered by Yoshida. The common elements are an earthy color palette, realistic proportions, and a world-building focused narrative. But Takahashi adds his own subtle, unique touch. His facial ratios stay realistic, with thin, stylized hair chunks highlighted strongly. He often exaggerates the crown of the head, giving his characters a slightly larger skull. A small detail, but distinct. His character anatomy leans closer to real-life proportions, which isn't that common in manga or anime-style designs. The true nature of his style lies in how he handles placement, volume, and color. He uses earthy palettes with bold, toned hues to create strong contrasts that guide the viewer's eye. Bright blues and reds serve both as color accents and as atmospheric reflections in the fantasy setting. Zoom in, and you'll see rough brushstrokes layered like a painter carving an image from darkness. He emphasizes key areas like faces or hands, while desaturating or simplifying less important areas to avoid overwhelming the viewer. That said, not every piece hits perfectly. Some of his works can feel visually overwhelming without a clear focal point. But his strongest pieces show nuanced visual storytelling, especially when characters interact. Still, most of his work leans towards poster-like compositions rather than direct story panels. While he's a master of volume painting, he also enjoys line art in his personal work. I love this unfinished style because it sits perfectly between concept art and finished illustration. Not fully rendered yet, but brings the essence across. When it comes to character design, Takahashi focuses on the full cast as a whole, rather than emphasizing each character individually. His designs feel like chess pieces on a board, distinct enough to fit their world, but sometimes lacking strong individuality. As a strong contrast to compare, look at Final Fantasy VII, where Tetsuya Nomura's early designs were more experimental and varied, and less world building and narrative, which he himself admitted in an interview. Both approaches have their strengths and weaknesses, but Takahashi's characters might feel less memorable to some audiences. Of course, Takahashi's skills go beyond characters. His environmental art carries a unique mystique, and his creature designs, especially the icons, are excellent. Basically, Takahashi knows how to paint epic scale in a fantasy setting. I'm light novel author GP Vugs, and one thing I've learned is that great artists grow by studying each other. Square Enix has always understood that better than anyone. From the earliest Final Fantasy titles to the newest releases, they consistently bring in artists who define the visual identity of each era.